Afternoon and welcome back to the Revenue Committee meeting, House Revenue. We're gonna appreciate everybody's work this morning. It's my we're gaveling back in at 1:45. So we've got hour and 20 minutes or so. So we've got one bill left, 203. I'm gonna go back down there and the vice chair and we'll continue this. It's kind of on the introduction of the bill last week when we had to go in early and hopefully finish this thing up and get some public testimony and we can move forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Vice Chair and I'll go down there. Thank you.
It's very lonely, Vice Chair. You don't have anybody either side of you.
I think I'm good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will leave it to you. We were walking through the bill, but we got hurried. So however you would like to proceed with your testimony, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Okay, I recopied the amendments, the exact same thing, but it was kind of a light color. So I ran it through the copier darker. And so it's easier to read. I think it's still not as dark. And then I gave you kind of a handout. I had that thing in like 3 pages, so I kind of shrunk the graphs down so it's a front and back. I've handed it out in the audience. I might have to share and look on. So Madam Vice Chair, I'd like to, last time we were here, I was kind of on what I'd call the front page of that, where I was really talking about it has those 8 points on sales and use tax really in Wyoming. And number one, about our lowest tax burden in the country at $22.40 per thousand income. And then the economic analysis of this bill, average Wyomingite, they're going to spend $400 out of their right pocket, but put $2,000 or more in their left pocket and save, hundreds a month in their escrow payments in their house payment, cut their house payment a couple $100 a month. And then again, number 3, I think it's important to remember why we have this low sales tax burden in Wyoming, because we don't tax groceries. I was the deciding vote back in the day on House revenue to move that to the floor. We don't tax groceries. We don't tax rent. We don't tax sales tax on fuel, insurance, child care, prescriptions, your water bill, cable, and other subscriptions. And again, as a consumption transaction tax, we've basically given folks the freedom to be taxed really depending on what you buy. Number 4 is kind of where the sales tax comes from. It's been a dramatic shift since the online sales tax was adopted by the legislature. It's probably been 7 years ago or so. Retail trade, number 1, nearly 40%. Hospitality is number 2, more so than the mineral industry. And most of that, you'll have sources show that 85% of that is paid by out-of-staters. A very significant amount. And then the mineral industry, I always say 10 to 15%, 12% is where the most recent is. And then county treasurers who collect the taxes on things we buy and license, and then other trade and utilities. And of course, we got bills in the legislature to remove sales tax on electricity. And then again, number 5 talked about out-of-staters. Number 6, out-of-state companies collect about 20% of our sales tax. Half our sales tax in that retail trade is big box or online big national companies. And so that's some of that. And then at the bottom of that page 1, and these are state and local combined rate averages. I mean, if you go to Denver, it's nearly 10, but the average, I think my mic, Eric, come back. The average for Colorado was 7.79. And you can see where Wyoming, these are the states in the Midwest and the West. And you can see the highest states, Oklahoma, Washington, California, Kansas, Arizona on that combined. Now, if this bill were to pass, Wyoming is currently 5.4, and we're about 44th out of 47 states that have a sales tax. As you know, Montana and others don't have a sales tax. And this would move us to about 20th. With the 7.4, and there's several states kind of tied, clustered right in that area on 20th in the nation. So that's the first page. Madam Vice Chair, if it's okay, I'll go to the second page quickly. And this is with these proposed amendments. I typed this in here. shared this with you the other day, but reduces property tax to zero for 97% of Wyoming homes with the $1 million exemption, making Wyoming the lowest property tax state in the nation. We pay for this exemption by raising sales tax by 2 cents. And in the net, this will be the largest tax cut in Wyoming history. And our sales tax, again, will still be in the middle of the states. So number 3, property is still assessed. The county treasurer and county assessor working together will send the bill for this exempted revenue to the state treasurer, who will then transfer the money to them from this property tax replacement account that the 2 cents flows into, back to the county treasurer, who will then distribute it and I bolded that there, in the same amount of state sales tax in exactly the same manner as we distribute local property taxes. So it doesn't, like Crook County, for example's really kind of taken off on property taxes, but their sales taxes haven't grown as much. It's not dependent on that. It's a state sales tax that will reimburse Crook County for the exemption totally. So it's not, some states might be a little more, or counties might be a little more, a little less, but the bottom line, your county, your local district, your fire district, weed and pest, is going to get the exact amount that is due to it if this exemption was not in place. We're just simply paying for the exemption with the sales tax. Okay, so in addition, number 4 there, severance taxpayers are held harmless. And that's in these in the bill. And then the amendments are kind of going back to a program we really had in the 90s that worked very well when we were going from 3.5 to 4 cent sales tax. We gave the governor the authority, working with the Department of Revenue, to turn that on or off. And this amendment allows the governor to ratchet that down by a quarter point. We don't want to, if some reason sales tax start outpacing this exemption, we're not going to try to build a bank in this account. We want to build a reduce the sales tax. So that's number 4. And then finally, and these are the charts, and this is in the amendment too. And these amendments were brought to me by House members after the introduction, and so that's why they're written in here. And I guess I can start at the bottom of that 5. My parents' first house was $3,000 in Wyoming, and my first home was $58,000, and so the question was brought to me, well, geez, we're all going to have $1 million home in a matter of years, and so I worked with LSO Fiscal to find what would be a sustainable amount to grow that exemption. And they came back to me with 2%. And so you can see that top chart is that $1 million exemption growing at 2% a year, compounding for 50 years. I did a 50-year example. I'll be 110 then. Some of you guys are still going to be around, I think. I could be at 110. But 2.7 million in 50 years. And then the average Wyoming home, and that's what the Teton average, you take Teton County out of that, the average drops, the average Wyoming home, but 390 is the average with Teton averaged in, and growing at the last 25 year rate of 3.5%, except for these zebra years of COVID when we had everybody moving in here and prices spiked. But you can see the exemption still stays $500,000 underneath. The whole average home stays $500,000 underneath the exemption. So those are amendments that you have before you. So that's kind of the real quick summary, Madam Vice Chair. I'd be happy to answer any questions on that sheet if anybody has any questions on those. Okay.
Questions for the question? Yes, Representative Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir. And just a quick question. I know you had talked at one point, and I don't mean to jump the gun, which I might, but I didn't specifically see it on here and I might have missed it, was some sideboards on if, for example, this was not, and this may be the wrong time, so I'll apologize if it is, but an amendment to maybe deal with the fact that if for some reason there was a legal issue or whatever, you would talk about an amendment possibly to have a sideboard that said, hey, the sales tax would be removed or repealed or whatever the right word is. Just wanted to double check that, sir.
Chairman Harshman.
Madam Vice Chair, through you, Representative Locke, so glad you asked that question because I didn't mention it, but on your amendment, the very last part, the Roman 3 on line 36 of your amendment, and then it flips over on this backside is page 2. And this was brought to me by a member of the House, you know, a conversation in the break room. And absolutely, so that additional rate specified in Romanette I, that's the 2 pennies, shall be reduced by the department to 0. And then flip it over if for any reason exemption under this 39 paragraph 43 is unavailable. So to answer your question exactly, if for some reason statute change or court decree, the exemption goes away, the 2 pennies goes away. Thank you for that question. Appreciate it.
Further questions for Chairman Harshman?
And Madam Vice Chair, that is a proposed amendment that you have in front of you. Yeah, thank you.
So, Chairman Harshman, what do you want to do next? You want to go through the bill? You want to talk
Sure.
about your amendment to go through the bill?
I think we'll just explain the bill and then take public comment, and then if we have time, work the bill. If that's okay. Committee, okay. Okay, flipping over to page 2. And you can see on the page 2, paragraph A, lines 16 through 22, you know, had to make a decision, and really it's up to you as a committee, but I wanted to start this right away to give people relief and start this reform, because this is truly relief and reform right away. Well, you can't really start a new sales tax until July 1st. Well, that only gives you a half a year, and how much? Basically 1 penny off of 2 pennies. 2 pennies for half a year is 1 penny. And that will pay for a $200,000 exemption. I know it's amazing. 1 penny only goes to 200, and the second penny takes you all the way to $1 million. But so that's what that is on line 18, 200,000 for next fall for tax year 2024 when we go to pay our taxes. So that'll be about $1,500, $1,400 to that every Wyoming homeowner. And then it will move to $1 million after that, and totally get rid of property tax for 97% of the homes in Wyoming. So that's paragraph A on page 2. And then flipping over to page 3, the department shall adopt rules and to administer the exemption, and C then defines single-family residential property. And as you know, we've been looking at this definition in all the bills that we've worked, including the house, modular home, mobile home, townhouse, condominium that is privately owned, single-family dwelling unit, and the associated improved land. And we've spent a good deal of time on that as well. Then most of this bill takes off on sales tax now, and that's on line 11, 3915-104 is sales tax, and then you'll see this exact same language on 3916, which is use tax, right? So, so this is paragraph J is talking about the state tax is moving from on line 19, 4% to 6%, 4 pennies to 6 pennies. Okay, and it's going to be distributed. And you can see on line 21 at 3915-111R, that's that new account, the property tax replacement account. Okay, flipping over the distribution, and that's existing language. And then the new paragraph R starts on line 9. And it's collected, attributable to be transferred to the property tax reduction replacement account. And it'll stay in that account. And then if you go down to line 21, Romanette I, an amount to each county to be distributed by the county treasurers in the same manner property taxes are distributed. So on and before September 1st, and county treasurers, and you could put county assessors and county treasurers, right? It's kind of the assessor job, but they work together on that. We could, you know, add assessors in there if you like. We'll certify the exemptions to the department and the amount available to distribute. And then it talks about it for some reason. Let's say that we have a massive drop and we can't cover this, which I think, you know, I've been really conservative on this to make sure we can pay our bills. And it would be reduced proportionally, and that's on lines 6 and 7. And then the timing of this, I think, works, working with folks who are in this business. that it'll be on February 15th, not later, and then those are distributed to local governments where property taxes are. And then lines 14 through 16. Really worked hard on this deal to try to figure this out because there are a few counties that still have bonded mills. Albany County did for their school district, and so, and it's my understanding, what I was told by the experts in this area is that right now you can't peel that onion back and say, okay, Albany County, here's your 70 mills, but your 3 revenue bond mills, you're on your own, or whatever that is, that amount. But beginning in 2026, we'll be able to separate those for future bonded mill levies and current bonded mill levies. Okay, and then Roman 2, Madam Vice Chair, on page 5, line 18, then this is where the mineral taxpayers rebate comes in. And so a refund to any person who pays, you can see on line 21, severance tax and also pays sales tax. So the department will adopt rules for that. And the refund program, if you flip over to page 6, due no later than April 1st. And this is kind of the time when mineral tax audits are occurring anyway, and tax time for all of us. And so it'll be paid no later than June 1st. Coal mine buys $1 million shovel, or a small oil field operator buys a $50,000 truck. Want to be able to turn those in and get those rebated back to keep, because minerals pay over half our taxes. And so that, I didn't want to raise taxes on our largest taxpayer in the state. Okay, and it says, under number 12, I've heard a little feedback that, if it's insufficient monies to fully refund each applicant, they'd be reduced proportionally. And I think we could probably put an amendment in there that, and I think I've been really conservative with this, so we make sure when we pay our bills, but thought of an amendment, getting feedback from folks here, that maybe we, if for some reason there's not enough money, up to 10 million in the LSRA can be used for this refund program. And that would certainly cover it. And maybe as little as 5 million. But I just think some to give those folks, our largest taxpayers, a little more assurance. Madam Vice Chair, Roman 3, gives the legislature shall annually review this, obviously, and then the proposed amendment that was passed out, you would also give the governor the ability to ratchet down the rate if there's somehow some kind of surplus. We're not, government's not meant to be a bank. We're not going to try to grow another LSRA or those kind of things. It's trying to be a pay for back and forth. Okay, and then Madam Chair and members of the committee, that's really the bill. Now, the next part comes in and went back and forth with this on local pennies. We have 4 state pennies and 3 local pennies. And right now it's a countywide option. And so was trying to make that a local option on bottom of page 7. So you keep the same language we have in there, or it could be a local option. So like Park County's, I think, a pretty good example. I've always been told that Powell votes for the tax, but Cody doesn't. And in the countywide vote is not to pass the tax. There's only 2 counties don't have the 5th penny. It's Sublette and Park. And so the thought would be, hey, if Park wants this and Park's people, Powell's people vote for it, then Powell could put it on. And Cody wouldn't have to have it. They didn't want it. And so that's what that does on line 7, the new language on lines 19 through 23. So flipping over, and that continues existing language through the rest of that paragraph. This one I'm hearing a little, and I think, I agree, I think, with the people that I've spoken to about this, a little bit of heartburn on this. Well, how do you keep the tax going, right? Because like Casper and Natrona County, we've never not passed it. We've passed it every time for decades now. And So the idea, and again, I'm trying to be sensitive to the local pennies because you're raising some more state pennies, even though you're getting rid of all property tax for, you know, 97% of the people, but, so this was to keep it going, and this new language would also allow, currently, it takes a majority of the municipalities and the county then to pass ordinances to keep it going. My proposed language in there, lines 16 through 21, would just let each individual municipality, through a resolution, once they've already voted in, to keep it going. I've got some feedback on that, and I'm not sure, I think we probably have to take that out of there. And I think I agree with the people I've talked to on that deal. And I just, it's trying to thread the needle on this with our locals, because, you know, we cut some state services, it affects people, but you cut local services. I mean, that's what property tax is. So I want to, and sales tax for cities. So I just want to, you know, I just want to point that out to you. That's, I think, a thing I've heard about. And, okay, I think on page 9, most of this is conforming stuff on line 6. And then really, folks, 3916 on line 15, it's the exact same thing, but it's use tax. So I won't have to go through that again. It's sales and use tax. Okay, and then flipping over to the back of the bill, you can see when it, you know, the implementation of it, and would start this summer and then be available for folks next fall. And I'd stand for any questions, members.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Questions? Representative Locke.
You, Madam Chairman, and thank you to the bringer. I appreciate that, or Mr. Chairman. And so just a couple of questions. I'll probably hit 2 or 3 of these, but so I'm just verifying. So conceptually, the concept is that we can actually, for lack of a better term, give relief this year. That's what the bill says, and so from the perspective of the bill, is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman.
Madam Vice Chair, yes, simply yes, because it'll start in July 1st with the 2 pennies, and that will produce enough revenue. Basically, it'd be like a 1-year penny with a half year of 2 pennies, right? Roughly the 240 million, 236 million per penny. And that pays for a $200,000 exemption for every residence in Wyoming, which is about $1,370, you know, depending on the mill levy in your county. That would grant that exemption. Yeah,
Follow-up?
$1,400 is what I call it.
Representative Locke, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple more questions, and more of this is for my own edification, just so I understand. But in that one section where you were talking about the funds that remained, and I'm trying to remember the page, it goes to the severance taxpayers, let me back up. It's available for them to ask for refunds from that. So that's for like the mineral industry. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman.
That's what you were trying to do, is maybe, like you said, their sales tax are going to be fairly high, and that's giving them, that's using any extra money as potential refund. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman.
Madam Vice Chair, that's 100% accurate, and I think the numbers work on it. You know, if you were just going to purely do residence and that associated land, it's just a little over 1.8 pennies is what the LSO was telling me. And then, and then to rebate the mineral piece, it takes you to about 1.96 or 7 pennies, you know, somewhere in there. And so that's what that on page 5, that Roman 2 is exactly about. So those folks who are paying severance and sales tax, you know, and then I guess, and there's a little caveat in there. It says it'll refund you sales tax or severance, whichever is less. And that was just really a protection written in there, like you might have a big thing where you're paying, you know, you're paying sales tax, but hey, let me get a gravel pit out back and I'll pay $50, you know, I'll pay $50 severance and get a $5,000 sales tax rebate. And you're not really a mineral producer, but I might open a small gravel pit out back. Really what we're talking about is coal, oil, gas, Trona, these big taxpayers that also pay severance, that pay a lot of severance, but also pay some sales tax, a lot of sales tax as well. Don't want to raise their rates. That's the golden goose in Wyoming, right? So, thank you, Madam Chair.
Further questions? Representative Bear.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Chairman, we've talked a lot about the mineral industry and their severance tax. Have you looked at other industries that are paying sales tax, the second tier, if you will, of highest taxpayers, and any thoughts on their exclusion in this bill?
Mr. Chairman.
Madam Vice Chair, and it's a good question, and so who's probably not gonna like this bill the most? If you hold mineral industry, it's gonna be probably wind producers, occasionally pipelines, that would have a, pretty substantial sales tax bills. And I think though, I guess, so I'm working this stuff through my head, and if you look at the front of that handout, I think, the wind industry and pipeline industry, they do a lot of business in Texas, do a lot of business in Oklahoma and Kansas, which still have much higher sales tax rates than us, as well as corporate income tax rates, which we don't have any corporate income tax. And pretty substantial property taxes higher than us on those corporate facilities. And so, I don't know, that's it. When you do anything with taxes, not everything is perfect, and so it's a good question, and it's one I've thought a lot about and tried to work through.
Further questions? Representative Locke.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Chairman. Another question was just on your discussion of those, that local 1 cent and the municipalities and that issue. I had a call, quite possibly from someone who you had a call from as well, just talking about that. And I'm not sure I know all of the nuance of this issue, but one of the things that this person tried to stress to me was the fact that we want to have a sidebar in there that makes sure that 1 penny decisions made by the electorate. And I know there's some other potential alternative processes, but is that an amendment if we do leave that, or if the text you're talking about taking out, if you can describe maybe how that all meshes together? Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman.
Madam Vice Chair and members, that'd be on page 8 on the sales tax. It'd be page 8, lines 16 through 21. And basically get rid of the new language that allows the continuation to be, particularly the language on the, right now, governing bodies of a majority of the incorporated municipalities and of the county commission can continue it by resolution, just or ordinance. And so this proposed language on page 8 would keep that similar, but it would allow individual municipalities. So Natrona County is a good example. If right now, you have Mills, Casper, Evansville, 3, then bar none, Midwest, Edgerton. Okay, so it's got to be a 4 to 2 vote. It was tied 3-3, and they brought it to the county commission. And so it's not going to go anywhere. It's going back on the ballot, which is fine. And we've done it every time. It's good. With this proposal, what I was thinking about would just be let each individual municipality decide that. So if Mills didn't want to and Casper wanted to, Casper could. And it's not a difficult thing to administer from the department. I've checked with them. But the feedback I've gotten from people is like, I think we like this county-wide consensus of municipalities to make it permanent. So it would be as simple as on page 8, lines 16 through 21, just striking that new language, just to keep the existing statute intact. And then there's the same provision in use tax later in the bill. So that's the issue.
All right, further questions for Chairman Harshman? Representative Strong.
Thank you, Chairman and Mr. Harshman. My question would be, sorry, Representative Harshman,
No, you're
so
good.
sorry. Get really nervous here. So, and like in a rural ranch setting, when there's multiple homes on the property, how would that work? Is it just the one home, or would all of them be part of that?
Really
Chairman
good
Hirschman?
question, Madam Vice Chair. Really good question through you. All those homes would receive the exemption, just like they do now. They're all assessed differently. And so, you know, that would be no different, I think, and maybe the department can comment some more, but we had similar testimony on this the other day on a different bill, if they'd all received the exemption, that kind of thing. So it's another exemption, yes. Thank you.
All right, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Chairman, have you thought about I'm going to call it divergence? I don't see a sideboard on here on assessments. So we could have assessments outpace, the exemption and end up kind of where we are now with the problem. Have you thought about that? And one more comment that I would make is I'm a little disappointed. I kind of like the whole idea, but we're still going to have to do all the assessments. So we're really not going to be able to eliminate the assessment process that we have today as far as assessing the entire county. Your thoughts on that?
Chairman Harshman.
Madam Vice Chair, through you, I think, I think it's a very good question. Had these same discussions. I think that's why you also pass a cap with it. You know, I think, and this bill the title is probably broad enough to amend the cap into it. If you had to, if you wanted one vehicle, we've got a vehicle cap exemption because we defeated that constitutional amendment change. But I think a cap would be a good part of that too. And we passed House Bill 45 and okay. And then the other part about the disappointing part, you know, and I think Wyoming is so different. You go back to territorial days when we started property taxes. It would be so hard to unwind all that. I mean, I look at Bighorn County as kind of the poster child for special districts. They've got every special district I think there is. And over these century and a half really of work and how you could kind of somehow unwind that. Those people have voted those in, you know, Washakie County is way different than Natrona County, you know, the way they give money to different districts. So I just think, and they keep their, you know, their county rate under that, but it's, man, I just think it'd be almost impossible. But I do hear from the assessors and from the commissioners, it's going to basically virtually eliminate the courthouse sales. And that's not a easy administrative task, even if it's a little parcel of land worth $100. You know, you got to go through all the steps to dispose of it on the courthouse steps. I think that's a biggie. And then I think like the same county commissioner that you and I talked to, Representative Locke, a lot less hearings in the spring for county commissioners. And so I think that a lot of that time, you know, can be used elsewhere and not in this area. So I think a cap bill with it would be really helpful too. I agree with you.
Follow up, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Mr. Chairman, you bring up a great point, and it makes me wonder, you know, when we create laws, we don't typically go back in time, but we have been talking about a clawback because there's been a lot of pressure in the last 2 or 3 years. We've got, I think, 3,000 liens out there in the state. Do you think that, you know, since we're going so far on this measure to completely change the way we do taxes, that we should look at that and those people deserve some sort of relief as well? What are your thoughts on that?
Chairman Harshman.
Madam Vice Chair, I think it's a really good question. I haven't thought about that actually until you just mentioned it. And I'd have to get schooled up on it. I don't know. I didn't know there were 3,000. I'd have to kind of look into that and what kind of liens. But I think, hey, that's what we're here for, is to solve problems. And I just don't know the extent of that problem or the issue.
Further questions? All right. Thank you, Chairman Harshman. So are you finished then? I'm going to go a little out of order and have Representative Storr speak to us. She's got somewhere else to be, but she would like to speak to the committee. So, I think have you given a handout? Okay, I think that was in our packet. Yep. Apologies to the agency and director. Thank you.
Thank you,
Go
Madam
ahead.
Vice Chair. Thank you, Chairman Harshman. Just to orient everybody, in your packets, you should have this handout that was in the back of the packets behind the bill. And then I handed out a second handout just today with some numbers on it. So I'll be referencing both of those. The first one comes from the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. This is the 7th edition of their Who Pays report, and it was just released last month. ITEP tends to look at state taxes across all 50 states. And what they bring to the table that I think is really valuable is that you look at how taxes impact different households at different income levels. We know that also a bill such as HB 203 that swaps out property tax for sales tax also will impact different households based on age and race as well. But I think for our purposes today, just looking at the income levels is important enough. So despite the good chairman's noting that we do have a low tax burden in Wyoming, thanks to the mineral industry, Wyoming is still a regressive state tax policy, which really means that we ask people at the lower income level to pay more as a percentage of their income than people at the higher level. And that's essentially what this tries to show you and breaks it out according to sales, property, and other taxes. It's regressive because we don't have an income tax, and we rely to a large degree on sales taxes. And as you can see, sales tax is the most regressive taxes because even with our exclusion of a lot of services and groceries, which this takes into account, we still ask people at the lowest income to spend 11% of their income on taxes, on state taxes, and only less than 4% for the top 1%. So I think what this says to me is that it's hard to say that that an average household actually exists in Wyoming. That if you really want to understand how a policy such as what HB 203 represents, you really need to drill down and see what this looks like at different segments of the population. As you can see from the second chart I handed out, sales tax does fall disproportionately on lower incomes. And based on a statewide average of 5.36% sales tax, a 2% increase is about 37% increase across the board. For Wyoming, because we are primarily white and because we trend towards older people, we actually do have a high home ownership rate compared to most states. And according to the Census Bureau, that's about 75%. But that means that 25% do not own their homes and are renting. And that's really where the problem comes in. So 2 issues here. One is that the actual increase or reduction in taxes really helps people at the higher income scale. And it really taxes renters especially so that if you look at the second handout in the box, you can see the difference between homeowners at different income levels, what they would receive in green and what it would cost renters in red. So it's not surprising that also younger households who have less homes and non-white households would also be impacted and skewed so that they would not benefit from this bill. Combining that with some of the other issues, the greater volatility of sales tax, the impacts that it would have on counties. There was strong opposition from the WCCA, and also the fact that only homeowners, I think Mr. Chairman would agree that if 97% of the homeowners get a tax break or won't be paying property tax, the only taxpayers who will be paying property tax reside in Teton County, in my constituents. So I don't think it makes sense to go down this route. I think we do believe that everyone should have some skin in the game, and this really takes away the second leg of our two-legged stool. So with that, I'll stand for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Storr. Questions, Representative Bear?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Representative Storr, you made the statement that sales tax is regressive, but all sales tax, well, most that I can think of right now is a choice. So there's no demand on it, much like, unlike housing and other taxes. So can you clarify how you determine that it's a regressive tax?
Representative Storr?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Thank you, Representative Bear. It does, because still the higher percentage of one's income when you're at a lower income household ends up being spent on stuff. And while some of that is groceries, it's calculated to be 6.1% of your income if you're in the lowest 20%, and only 0.9% if you're in the top 1%. Now, the numbers, obviously, because the average income for the top 1% in Wyoming is $1.7 million. So they will be, from a dollar perspective, obviously spending more on sales tax than people at the lower end. But as a percentage of income, it's much higher.
Follow-up, Representative Bear?
Yes, thank you. I'm going to divide this into two, if that's all right with you, Madam Vice Chair. I would agree with you about the volume of their income being spent on it, but those are still choices. So I guess I would ask you, do you believe that the sales tax is maybe one of the least regressive taxes that we have of our options that we're talking about today? And the second part of my question is, I do agree with you about the rental issue. And I've thought about this. One thing that is helpful is that, for instance, mobile homes are included. Obviously, if they're renting a lot under that mobile home, it's not included. But if we made it more encompassing in this bill, where we encompassed corporations, for instance, which we have in the other category, which might even help it survive a lawsuit, would that be something that you think is worth pursuing and looking at?
Thank you, Representative Bear.
Representative Storr?
Thank you. I don't think so, but I'd be happy to discuss it at a later date with you.
All right. Any other questions? Chairman Harshman?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And Representative Storr, and I think you bring up this whole struggle with all taxation. I mean, how, and and the bottom line, though, it affects everybody differently. It doesn't affect any household, because every household and every person is different. But I think on this sheet, I think, and, the 11.1% on the lowest, and then I guess my question on property tax is, why is it 6.1? I mean, are you trying to say that 6.1% is better than 11.1%? And I think if you do that, I think you gotta look at the dollars, and that's really on the handout, you know, an economic analysis says the average Wyoming family of 3 in 2022 earned 68,000. That's Wyoming people. And so this deal, with this bill, you know, you're gonna pay about $400 out of your right pocket and put about $2,000 in your left pocket. And to me, that's a huge, huge savings for families. So to lower mortgage rates, because you're gonna eliminate a big chunk of escrow. And then I think, you know, I talked to a guy on Saturday. I reached out to him when I was back home. He owns 10 houses in Casper. And he doesn't own them yet, but he's working it and paying them off. And I said, what do you think about something like this? Would you be able to give your renters a break? And I'll just tell you, earlier versions of this bill, I had a renter refund. It's just hard to figure out a way to, and he says, absolutely. And number one, their rent would stop going up. That's the first thing, you know, and then would look at, you know, and that's just one person I talked to. So I know it's anecdotal, but I know the percentages are important, and I don't disagree with you, but if you do the numbers on that lowest 20%, it's $3,000. And that is, it's 11% is according to this document. And then, you know, you look at the top ones,
Mr.
it goes up a bunch, I guess. And
Mr.
so
Chair,
I
is there a
don't,
question?
well, the question is, I think you gotta look at the dollar amount is more important than the percentage amount, because you're kind of comparing apples to oranges. A lower percentage of a higher dollar amount is still more money out of people's pockets.
Okay, I'm gonna, I'll let you respond, but I am going to say we need to keep moving. We're not, this is not for debate at this point. So if you'd like to answer, Representative Storr.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Thank you, Chairman Harshman. I would just say that the calculations here that I've done based on what is calculated by ITEP as the burden of taxes show that for the middle income, people who are homeowners would get essentially an average of $800 in a positive net change. But for those who are renting, it would cost them over $1,000 more. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Storr. I just, if the director, the department wants to come up, but I just would like to say to everybody, obviously, there's a ton of interest in this bill. We are now down to 30 minutes, and I want to hear from everybody and have that robust discussion. So let's keep it tight. Thank you. If you'd go ahead and introduce yourself and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Brenda Hinson, Director of the Department of Revenue, and Co-Chairman Oakley. I will keep my comments brief and specific to the administration of this bill. First and foremost, I think the good Representative Chairman has hit every division within the Department of Revenue, excluding liquor. But I know there's plenty of opportunity for amendments here, so it's not over. So with that, bottom line, with the language as it exists in this bill, we can administer this bill outside of one portion, and that would be the refund for the companies that have paid a severance tax, because we would need an application process for that. We have approximately 500 companies that we believe would qualify for some or at least some refund. So we do need to prop up a system that they could go out and provide us the information. Everything would need to be provided by the taxpayer related to documentation on what sales tax they have paid as a result of this increased 2%. So we would be asking in a fiscal note of approximately 300. It would be 288,000. We did get a price quote from our vendor to prop up that application process. And we do anticipate that it would take a full-time employee for about 6 months to process those applications. Now, keep in mind that this only kicks in if the amount of money in that newly created account where we put this 2% of sales tax only when it exceeds the amount of reimbursement that all county treasurers and assessors would indicate to make all of the taxing entities whole. So I know that within the efforts for the fiscal note, the attempt was to try and make sure that the sales tax that was collected would provide some relief for those companies that are paying severance tax. The other piece of this, I just wanted to clarify on page 3 where it defines single-family residential property. So this does provide an exemption to that property owner on the residential structure as defined and the associated improved land. But if there are outbuildings, commercial property, other types of property that are on that assessment, they would be responsible for those taxes. And the CAMA system is capable of separating, the residential improvements versus, let's talk agricultural land. If they've got agricultural land, obviously they'd have to pay the amount on that. And this does, the way we read this is it is per residential structure on those parcels. So for the first year for 2024, it would be up to $200,000 fair market value on the residential structure and the associated land on that parcel. But it's for each structure. And then, of course, that would kick up to $1 million per residential structure for those years following. Now, it does require that the Department of Revenue promulgate rules, and we need to do that rather quickly, and we believe we can do so. But, Mr. Chairman, with that, if you have any questions related to the administration of this bill, I'd be happy to do my best to answer those questions, or I do have the experts in the back of the room. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Yeah, any questions for the Director? Representative Bear and then Representative Locke.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Director, thank you for being here. Very quickly, this may be something you need to get back to me later, but do you know what the percentage of other types of homes within the residential category are, like duplexes and larger, versus these single-family homes?
Director Henson.
Madam Co-Chairman, Representative Bear. So the way the definition works, these are all single family. So if I'm understanding your question, you're saying what other multifamily that this does not apply to?
Right.
How many of those are there out there? And I don't have that information right offhand, but we certainly could do some research.
Follow up, Representative Bear.
Yes, follow up. Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair. Just one other piece of information. I'd just like to know, outbuildings that you mentioned, what would be the volume of taxable property that would qualify as those outbuildings that would be excluded from this particular bill?
Director Henson.
Co-Chairwoman, Representative Bear, I don't have that information broke out, but it's basically everything that exists on a property outside of the residential habitable structure and the associated land. So if you had riding arenas, commercial property, it would all still be the responsibility of the property owner to pay those taxes.
Thank you, Director, and Representative Locke.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So a handful of questions, if you don't mind me kind of rapid fire and see if this helps. The first one is on those outbuildings. If the decision was made, if we were to amend the bill to include outbuildings, is that something that you could administer? Or is that a level of complexity that would have to needs to be addressed in more of an out year? And then another question is just on the sales tax numbers themselves. Conceptually, as sales tax go up, it is not uncommon for that. It certainly doesn't show up as a linear climb. In many cases, people then learn to curb their behavior or there's changes that affect that. Were the numbers that were run for this bill, did they take into consideration that increasing sales tax has that drop-off curve? Is that something that you can speak to as well? Thank you.
Director Henson.
Madam Chairman, so to address your first question, I believe we could administer that. The fiscal impact, meaning what is it going to cost to backfill those taxes, is significantly different than what was used to analyze this kind of sweet spot where we would add an additional 2 cents and then reimburse everybody. So I think that analysis would need to be extended. So we could certainly do that. And if I may ask Mr. Fanning to come up and provide a little more background on the fiscal note and how those calculations were made, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, go ahead and come up, Mr. Fanning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, Brett Fanning. I'm the Excise Tax Administrator at the Department of Revenue. So, Madam Co-Chair and Representative Locke, those numbers do not take into account any sort of decrease in consumption. I also came up with it was a 37% increase in the general sales tax rate. When I worked with LSO on those numbers, we came up with about 240 million was what a penny would bring in to the state of Wyoming. Those numbers do not take into account any decrease in consumption or changes in preferences in the buying power. Because as you mentioned, and there is some ability to choose what you're being taxed on or not, some ability. These numbers do not take into account that.
Follow up, Representative Locke?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that. So just for clarification, it was more of a straight line. And then I want to voice, just mention an issue. So when I look at the fiscal note, and I actually reached out and got a little bit kind of a more concise, simple number on the fiscal note. If I look at that, in 2025, it shows a difference of about, and I'm sorry about these numbers, but it kind of shows a difference of about 247 million. So you're looking at this fairly significant difference of approximately 106% of what the number is. But then you see in 2026 and 2027, the numbers drop off quite drastically. And my question is, does that mean we're looking at a cliff, or what are we looking at? I know the chairman has mentioned the possibility of I'm wondering if that's related to potential increases, extreme increases in assessment, or what's impacting that. Because, when you look at this, I just wanted to look at those numbers and say, do we have a glide path that doesn't show this going negative in 3, 4, or 5 years? I wanted to understand those numbers more to where you say, oh yeah, that's a sustainable model. And so I just wanted to kind of ask some of those questions and get your thoughts. Thank you.
Mr. Fanning?
Yeah, Madam Co-Chair, Representative Locke, I'll take the sales tax portion of this. So those analysis, they were using the Craig forecast that recently just came out. So any of the calculations that are done based on the additional pennies come in are using the latest available Craig forecasts, which forecast out those revenues based on our sales taxes.
And Madam Chairwoman,
Director Henson.
and Representative Locke, specific to property values, well, of course, we've got the change between the $200,000 exemption and $1 million. And so that increases the cost. But yet we still have a year to collect the sales tax, as opposed to only having 6 months to collect the sales tax for 2024. At least that's my understanding as written. And then with the addition of the 2%, again, some of the amendments that you're considering or will be possibly considering, we didn't include that in any of our analysis because we didn't have those at the time. So, thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you both. So any other agencies, county commission? What's that? We've got time. Oh, yeah, we might continue this in the morning. So with that, though, I know there's a lot of people in the room that want to speak. Is there anybody that cannot be here in the morning? So start with that, and if not, And do you want to speak onto this? Okay, if you'll come up, and then from there, be ready, county commissioners. Good afternoon. If you would introduce yourself and proceed with testimony, please.
I'm Mary Schmidt from Natrona County, and I just have a question on this bill. Are you willing to put an amendment in where you cap the 2% so that we as consumers aren't looking at a potential of a continual increase in sales tax to offset the money that you're losing from property taxes?
Chairman Harshman.
Madam Vice Chair, Ms. Schmidt, thanks for being here and coming down from Casper. I trust your school board meetings were good. Yeah, the bill only allows 2 pennies. So it would take another law change to raise that. It's not at the whim. The only thing that is at the whim is to make it go down in an amendment that I brought forward, similar to what we did in the 90s. It worked very well in the 1990s when we were broke and we were trying to, this 3.5, 4 penny thing, and the governor would actually move it at times. So we've had experience of that in our state. And so, and this was really brought to me by another member too, thinking, it's the last thing, we don't want to build, say you have a boom in sales tax. We don't want this thing to grow and have several hundred million in an account. We want to ratchet down the sales tax. So you're just paying your bills, right? Keeping that thing pretty much even. That's the idea. So it would take a law change to raise it. Thank you for that question.
One more question. Is there a legal issue constitutionally, the fact that you're taking a sales tax and having to move it to cover the education, which is the requirement of the Constitution? So you're changing the route of the tax, where property tax goes straight in and it's allocated to education. This is now a sales tax that you have to reroute. Will that be a hurdle or a difficulty constitutionally?
Chairman Harshman, do you want to
Yeah.
do that?
No, it's a great question. And I think, we're like every other state. We generally pay for education with property taxes. The issue in Wyoming is minerals pay over half our property taxes. So there's this volatility. But to your question, it doesn't change the property tax format of funding education at all. We're still going to assess property. It's still going to be this amount, and it is going, the 43 mills are going to the local school district. And then if it's recaptured or what, it goes to the state. Okay, and that's a constitutional change in '04. So it doesn't change any of that. I think we're like all of these exemption bills, there's 2 competing parts in the Constitution. What is it, 1511, 1512? One says in our Constitution that property must be taxed and not taxed, but valued at full market fair value. And then it also says in 1512, but the legislature can create exemptions. And so, yeah, it's a fair question, and that's why I bring in this proposed amendment that, let's say somebody does bring a lawsuit and the Supreme Court says, yeah, this exemption has gone too far, then the 2 cents automatically would go away. And, but no, I think it's a fair question. I think that's with all laws. We're the first ones to judge whether it's constitutional, but if somebody challenges it, and the Supreme Court is really the end one, to say whether it's constitutional. But yeah, it's a good question. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Go ahead and come up, county commissioners. We've got 15 minutes till we are back on the floor. Do county assessors want to come up as well, or?
Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the County Commissioners Association.
Hey, committee. Representative Bear.
The chairman asked that I provide you with a little bit of information about the local option taxes, which really, frankly, is our concern relative to this. So I've just provided you a pretty simple handout, and I'm going to focus my time on the back. The front just mentions the the share of state and local sales and use taxes. As you've seen me through the years show you the tiers relative to property taxes, I did something very similar here with the state sales and use tax. And generally those percentages relative to the tiers have remained about the same year over year. I'll just mention one change that did happen between Tier 2 and Tier 3. Crook County actually moved up into Tier 2 and Platte County dropped into Tier 3 in terms of sales and use tax between fiscal year 22 and 23. Madam Chairwoman, moving to that last slide, the fourth slide, the local sales and use tax, and these are fiscal year 23 numbers. I'll start with that first heading because, and my predecessor was really good about pointing this out. There's a lot of talk about the fifth penny, the sixth penny, the seventh penny, and generally a lot of people associate the fifth penny with the general purpose, the sixth penny with a specific purpose, etc. But it's really important to understand that you can have two general purpose pennies. You could have two specific purpose pennies. You could have an economic development penny, and you can have them in fractions of some of these, but you can't have more than 3 local pennies. So you could have a fifth and sixth general purpose, for example. So making that association, while it's easy, isn't necessarily always the case. So I just wanted to point that out. As has been referenced a couple of times, right now, 21 of 23 counties impose a general purpose penny totaling $65.4 million in fiscal year 23. The 2 counties that don't impose that particular general purpose penny are Sublette and Park counties. And more recently, the Park County voters did vote down that general purpose. There are 12 of the 23 that have a specific purpose, and you can see the total there. And we have 2 counties that have a fractional penny for economic development. Those 2 counties are Goshen and Fremont. Fremont's is generally related to air service as well as some other economic development elements there. What's important, and this is part of the concern about the state adding 2 pennies, is that no county has ever approved more than 6 pennies, not even in the fractional sense. The most recent to attempt to go above that 6th penny ceiling is Teton County, and the voters had the opportunity both in 2016 and 2020 to go towards a 7th penny, but voted it down. What's really interesting about Teton County is although they may have rejected the 7th penny in the most recent election in 2022, they approved over $160 million worth of specific purpose projects for 15 different items. It was the largest ever dollar amount and number of projects that were supported through a specific purpose. So while they weren't willing to go above 6 pennies, they were willing to impose it for those projects there. And I would just note one other thing that's not on the slides here. As you'll remember, just a couple of years ago, we added the municipal option. So that's embedded into the equation. Right now, no county or no municipality has approved or even attempted to approve the municipal option, but it is one of the other local options that does exist. And I'll just close by saying that when we get into these conversations about giving a municipality or county the front end of all of this, it's really important to understand that every municipal voter is a county voter. And when you put a municipality in front of a ballot initiative, you have the potential to create issues for the unincorporated part of the county and being able to do projects in those particular areas. So there is good reason to keep those two things together when you're talking about the local options. This, of course, again, we haven't gone above 6. This puts the state at 6. So we need to be cognizant and try and craft solutions that would provide for that space for local options as we move here. And I'm very willing to work with the chairman and all of you to try and figure that out. But it is the biggest issue that we see when we come to this particular piece of legislation. With that, Madam Chairwoman, I'd stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Reamon. Questions? Representative Swanser.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. So my question's on unanticipated consequences, and I just want you to stop the black helicopters. And although you're not a county commissioner, and not that I would assume to know what they do, but if I was a county commissioner and I no longer had to approve all of our special district budgets and say, well, you're only taking 70% of that mill, you're not assessing your full mill, what stops all of the special districts in any county saying, well, someone else is paying for it out of this fund, let's all assess our cap? So that's my first question. Is there anything that would stop them all saying, we don't have to go to before our voters, we consider there's a big pot of money, everybody max it out up to the constitutional provision? That's my first question. Second is, what stops new cities from jumping up? Right, there's nothing really preventing now, if you're not having to pay that property tax. We have 8 houses that are next to each other, and they say, hey, let's become a city. And they don't have that tax burden. It's being paid from somewhere else. And now they get, they get direct distribution, they get a bunch of other fund benefits. And so if we contemplated what it looks like when you no longer have that balancing issue between your locally elected officials having to be responsible for those property tax increases, now there's just a big pot of money somewhere else. Fair game, everybody goes to the max, and equal proportion if there's not enough money in it, decrease. All of that, if you can do it in 2 minutes, or get back to me tomorrow.
Mr. Reamon.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Swanitzer, I don't know that I have the full answer. In terms of the folks that I represent, 21 of the 23 are already at their max mills. And I don't anticipate that you're going to have Campbell and Teton County pushed to that maximum in order to grab this additional revenue. I just don't see it for those 2 counties. Could you see it for special districts, maybe municipalities? It is a question that I've had in my own mind. I verbalized this to somebody else. What about the fact that, do you incentivize more special districts coming onto the system? And how do you control that within all of this? I think the trend is that over time you do see more special districts. So I think they're legitimate questions that you have to answer as part of this and craft solutions for.
Chairman Hirschman.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I think it's an interesting question. We've had a lot of talk about this, and all of us on this whole. Now, first question though, Chairman Swanser had, the Board of County Commissioners on special districts. They don't really approve their budgets, do they? You have a special district, Board of County Commissioners, can they come in and say, hey, you only get a half mil, not your full mil?
Mr. Reamon.
I think we had a bill to do that.
Mr. Reamon.
Mr. Chair, Madam Chairwoman, I don't know that we have enough time
Yeah.
to answer that question.
Fair enough.
The reality is that no special district is created alike, and so there are special districts that the county commissioners do have some power, maybe not over the mill levy, but in terms of vetoing their budget, which of course is a mechanism to control some of that. So there's a much longer answer to that, of course.
And I think Chairman
Mr.
Swanser brings, thank you, Madam Vice Chair, sorry. And I think he brings up a good point. I think I've always in these conversations, it's any municipality or governing body doesn't just have residential property taxpayers. They have commercial, ag, and mineral property taxpayers who are significant taxpayers, who are going to weigh in on an explosion of property tax increases of somehow. So I think that's the first guard against it. the biggest taxpayers in the state to answer to, frankly. Okay, that's my 2 points on that. And so I think that was kind of a question. Do you agree, Mr. Reeman? I see you nodding, so you
Mr.
answered yes.
Reeman, if you have anything?
Yes.
Any, Representative
Thank you,
Bear?
sir.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Just a quick question. You had mentioned several times, Mr. Ryman, that these various communities have rejected an additional tax or to go above the 6 cents, 6%. Do you have any idea why? Do you have any kind of data that says this is what the reason for the pushback is, or the lack of interest in the higher tax?
Mr. Reeman?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Bear, I don't have that sort of data, just sort of the history. And we've seen other communities. I mentioned Teton County. We have seen others that have rejected it. I've talked to a few county commissioners about this, and, you know, because you pointed out the fifth penny, you can make that a permanent through resolution after it's adopted, and some places have. You know, some of the commissioners say, hey, we've had voters come in when we've talked about that and say, I'll never vote for a sixth penny, a specific purpose ever again if you do that, but I'll vote for both of them if you put it on the ballot.
Chairman Harshman?
Thank you, Vice Chair. You know, so thinking about trying to thread this needle, I mean, you have these 3 local pennies. What if we were able to amend this bill somehow and you say, hey, the fifth penny is permanent, the fifth local penny, but let's give you an opt-out, you know, like Sublet and Park don't have it. If they don't want it, they can opt out, and any other county could opt out. But in giving you that penny as an opt-out, let's take away that third local penny. So the taxpayers of Wyoming are kind of permanently protected at the top ceiling of that. Any thoughts about something like that, or?
Mr. Reeman?
Madam Chairwoman, Chairman Harshman, doing those 2 pieces, I don't think is a problem so much for the calculus for us. It's that middle penny that causes me a little bit of angst that I've got to talk to the members about and understand how that would work for them.
And then just
Chairman
a
Harshman?
quick question, and kind of for the committee, and I'm thinking about my own county, you know, and we're talking about that sales tax for a general or specific purpose. But you can also go to the voters, can't you, for a you know, property tax increase to pay for that. I remember, like in Natrona County, the first proposal was property tax to build a new library, and then that was rejected, and then went to sales tax. So is that true, though? Do you still have both those avenues to go to the voters for specific purpose type things?
Mr. Reeman?
Madam Chairwoman, yes, you do have those other avenues. The concern that I think I've expressed is that not every taxing jurisdiction is made up the same, and can they afford to do it that route versus a specific purpose, as one example. I don't know that example, and you can't always do the same thing with each of these options either.
All right, last question, Representative Locke.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. A couple of quick questions. First one was, you had talked about not changing the way the municipalities, if I heard that right, and I'm sorry, I'm reaching over to the presenter of the bill. I assume that means that text on page 8 would be what would go away, if I heard him correctly. Does that sound right? Second question for you is, if you can give us, I know we're cutting through time, if you can give us is these extra pennies the only major issue with the WCCA? Because they had, you know, they were highly against, or whatever the right term was. Are there other issues we need to be aware of that they were concerned about? Was there more discussion than that? Thank you.
Mr. Reeman?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Locke, it really, the main issue comes down to those optional pennies and the effect of this. There are some other operational things that come up in the conversation, but they're not to the magnitude of concern of the local options.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Reeman. And here we're going to pause our discussion of House Bill 203 and return at 8 in the morning. I apologize to the assessors and to everybody else who I know been here with us for a long haul on all of this. So, like I say, we're Adjourned.